Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. This is Martin Willis, your host. We did the regular show, podcast, etc., with Jason Sands and Darcy Weir. If you missed that, I'll have it down in the text below, the link to that. So check that out. That was our regular podcast this week. We did it Sunday on location in California. So the following for tonight in our regular time slot on YouTube is two interviews that I did out in California at the UFO Con 2025. And one is Mike Walker. He talks about his own experience and how that affected his life. And the second interview is Brian Jackson, and he talks about Dan Burisch, a controversial figure in the 1990s and 2000s. And so enjoy this podcast tonight, and we'll be back next week with G.O. Turner. So a blog over at Podcast UFO this week is a 1981 report of an Ohio family besieged by UFOs, hairy humanoids, and black forms. So check that out over at podcastufo.com. Thank you for supporting the show. Hey there, so I'm at the conference and I'm here with Michael Walker. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, so anyway, this has been an interesting event out here in Northern California, and it's really difficult for us to find any place that's quiet here, so here we are. We're going to see how this goes. But so tell me a little bit about yourself and how you get interested in this topic.
Well, it all started back in 1985. It started with a walk around the block. I just went outside and met up with a friend in the middle of the street in Hayward, right across the bay.
Oh, yeah.
And it had just gotten dark out. And I met up with a friend named Chano. And reflecting on that moment now as an adult, it seemed pretty eerie because there wasn't much conversation about the walk around the block. There was just a common understanding that it was time for a walk around the block. So that's what we did. We started walking. And I was admiring the sky. The clouds were really low that night, and they were moving pretty quick too. And they were lit up, and nothing was out of the ordinary. Even at 12 years old, I understood that the clouds appeared to be moving pretty quick because they were low. And I'm sure the moon was kind of lighting them up still. So it was just a really pretty night, admiring the sky. And then a section of the clouds actually began to swirl. It was a very small, slow swirl, not a natural phenomenon type of swirl. It was a clean, crisp, calculated swirl. So like I said, it started off really small and slow, and it got really big, really fast, and I blacked out. And then my very next conscious moment, I was no longer standing where I was standing when I seen that. I was now about a half a block further down the street. And now my arms are to the side of my body and my head is looking straight up, and I'm literally standing beneath the flying saucer. And as I'm looking at the belly of this craft, there's this blue light that's sporadically flashing on the belly of the craft. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, if this is a UFO with modern technology, why does it seem like it has some kind of electrical issue going on, right? And as soon as I thought that, it snapped out of whatever issue I thought it had, and it began to, what I thought, show off. And it put on a multicolored light show. Every color that you can imagine. It was balanced, it was symmetrical. The light show actually started off pretty slow, and then it got steadily faster and faster and faster, and it kind of reminded me of that Simon Says.
Oh yeah,
boop, 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 boop. So it just kept going faster and faster and faster, and then the light show stops, and then the craft hovers ahead of me a little ways, so now I'm no longer fixed directly underneath the belly. I could see the entire ship itself, and there's nothing to it. It's a disc-shaped object. And it did a little bit of a wobble, and it took off near the speed of light, and it took off towards the Hayward Hills, and it moved so fast that it was almost comical. It was like a cartoon. If I would have blinked my eyes, I would have thought that it disappeared, but I seen it with my eyes, and it took off like the speed of light. Only after that craft took off, that's when I was able to move. And the first thing I did was I looked to my left, because that's the last place Chano was when we were walking before the clouds began the vortex. Sure enough, he was still to my left, but we're in about a 200, I don't know, about a half a block from where we were standing. But the first words out of my mouth when I looked at Chano after the craft took off was, "That was a UFO, huh?" And Chano just goes, "Yeah." And it kind of threw me for a loop, like, what do you mean, yeah?
Yeah.
It was a long, awkward conversation back home. There wasn't much conversation at all. It was an awkward walk back home. I could tell that he just didn't want to talk about it. I tried to get him to talk about it because we had just graduated elementary school. I was 12 years old in '85, looking forward to go to junior high school. So when junior high school started, I told everybody and their mother about our experience. And I was a bit of a class clown, so that didn't really work towards my advantage. So what I would do was, well, hey, I had somebody with me, right? Isn't that a blessing? I mean, that's a validation right there. I had somebody with me, and his name was Chano, and everyone knew Chano was more of a serious football guy. You know, everyone kind of looked up to him and stuff. So when I say that Chano was with me, they would go, all right, well, let's go track Chano down. And man, Chano was so tired of me bringing groups of friends over. But he would, you know, answer my questions, but I had to pull it out of him. Every answer I'd get, I had to pull it out of him. So I would just basically sum it up to, Chano, can you just say yes or no? You know, and he would go, man, Mike, you're still talking about that? You know, and he would go, yeah. It just wasn't enough. And I got embarrassed to even talk to Chano anymore about it. I just left him alone.
Well, can I interject something, please?
Sure, yeah.
I have a good friend who has told a very similar story about him and his friends. It was a group of friends.
Yeah.
And this thing was over them, and it was, he cannot get his friends to talk about it.
No, it's
they won't talk about it. And he's, you know, I know him from the antiques world, which is what I do professionally, antiques and art and things like that. And so does he. And he called me one day, he says, podcast UFO, huh? And then he told me his story. Like, he's been listening to my show, and he told me his story. But I just think it's really strange when those type of things happen.
Yeah.
But they do happen where other people that are involved do not want to talk about it.
Yeah, that's one of the commonalities that I found within other experiencers.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
so it kind of helps.
So continue on. I'm sorry. I just wanted to get that in there before you moved on to, you know, later.
Yeah. So I pretty much left Chano alone, and I actually left the whole subject kind of alone. You know, the conversations were really far and few in between with me having this discussion with people about my experience. And it wasn't until literally maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I really just started becoming honest with myself and just started searching down deep, dark rabbit holes, picking out little pieces of truth, and not operating down in these rabbit holes. Some people go down in these rabbit holes and they stay down there, and it's like it's a real low vibration. So what I did was I just went down in these rabbit holes. I got the little pieces of truth that I needed, and I bounced up out of there. And it just led to synchronicity after synchronicity after synchronicity. And at a point, it became somewhat biblical for me, because after the UFO experience, I had these really weird dreams that stuck with me. And you know, I'm 12 years old, and I'm dreaming of the wheel within the wheel, things that I had no idea what they were until I got older and I started researching, and I realized I wasn't the only one that's seen this wheel within the wheel. It's actually a biblical figure named Ezekiel. He was an Israelite prophet, you know, during the Babylonian takeover, and he describes a vision of God, and he describes the wheel within the wheel. They call it the Ophanim, the thrones, but it's part of the angel hierarchy. It's something I had to look into. I was not really into religion and things like that, but I felt like I was forced to find out about it, because I experienced something that I really feel like I had no business at 12 years old seeing. So I knew that there had to be something to it. So apparently this Ophanim, this throne angel, is like the third highest ranking angel within the choir of the angel hierarchy. So it started getting a little biblical in a sense, and I decided to be brave enough to talk to my wife. She always knew. I've been with her forever. We've been married a really long time. I got 2 grown men now.
Yeah.
And she was 17, I was 19. She always knew that I had an experience with the UFO. And like I said, I've only became honest with myself within the last 3 or 4 years. And I started calling it what it was, I started putting some pieces together, and I realized that I had been taken. I was here, and then I was displaced here. I drew a picture of the block. I took a picture of Google Earth of this block that I went to walk around, and there's like half of it I never made. There's missing time there. And for me to suggest to my wife that I had been taken or abducted, it was too much for her.
Now, but you're still married.
Still married.
Just met her, or just saw her, right?
Well, I made a prayer that someday I can have an experience with her, figuring that it would be a lot easier on us to move on with our lives if she can have an experience with me. And I kind of forgot about it, and sure enough, I'll be darned, me and my wife go outside in San Leandro. This was July 21st, 2022, 9:15 p.m. Me and my wife go outside of our apartment in San Leandro, and I see this object coming my way. And I didn't want to embarrass myself, because I've done that before in front of my wife with like Mylar balloons and drones and stuff.
Yeah.
But
easy enough to do.
Yeah, right. It just takes a minute, and you realize, oh, okay. But it triggers me, right?
Yeah.
So I played it off. I seen what it was. I knew it wasn't a drone, but I said, what kind of drone is that? And we're just looking at it, and this thing was rolling, flipping, rotating. There was a point where, Martin, I was like, is this thing shape-shifting? It was kind of hard to put an eye on it, So when this object got just overhead, it seemed to kind of slow up just enough, and it displayed a pattern of lights within one of the rings. And it was a pattern of lights that it just wasn't flying around with. It was a pattern of lights that illuminated from within the craft. Brilliant, beautiful white lights. Pattern of lights. And as it was overhead, I see the pattern of lights, and then it just kind of kept on pimping on down the road, right? Just kept on doing whatever it was doing until it was out of sight. And there was a point where I actually had the frame of mind to pull out my phone, and I did. And I got a video of it, but it's not this groundbreaking evidence. I knew I wasn't trying to get this groundbreaking evidence. I just kind of wanted the license plate of the car that just hit me, basically. I wanted a memorandum, so to speak. And so I got a little video of it, and went upstairs right away, and I started drawing pictures of it, and I started noting what time it was, what day it was, and I started sharing this information with my group that I have online called Paranormal UFO California. It's a private group that I started about 7 or 8 years ago. So I'm trying to share this information, and I'm drawing the light pattern that I've seen, and my wife comes up to me and she circles a couple of the lights, 2 of the white lights, and she goes, that's what I seen. I was like, oh wow, so you didn't see the actual pattern here that, it was 4 white dots and a white line. 4 white dots and a white line. One more time, 4 white dots and a white line, all stacked on top of each other. And so to me, it looked a lot like Morse code. And so I Googled Morse code, and I thought maybe it would spell out something, we are here, take me to your leader, I don't know. But it was actually a numerical pattern, and it was telling me 4, 4, 4. And of course, that's an angelic number. I look up the meaning of 444, and it just seemed to tell me everything that I needed to hear about my guardian angels. I'm on the right path. What you're working for is soon going to happen. Just trust in your guardian angels. And I went outside for another break immediately. And when I was outside by myself this time, I had 2 barn owls screeching, and they went flying over my head pretty darn low. And I'm out there in the hood. This is San Leandro. I'm not up in the hills like I am now, in the forest or anything. This was just another regular neighborhood. And to me, it was a validation of the owls. And here we go, speaking of owls again and UFOs, there's this weird connection that people have.
Mike Cleland, I don't know if you've read his book, Mike Cleland.
I've heard of him, but I don't think I've read his book. But yeah, there's a lot of synchronicities.
It's all about the owls.
Something about, the owls are not what they seem.
Yeah, yeah. So, but yeah, interesting. So if you took all the equation of, say, the angelic part away from this, would you still be convinced that something happened?
Oh, absolutely.
And have you ever tried any regression therapy?
Not yet.
Hypnotherapy?
Not yet.
And are you open to that?
Absolutely. Yeah. That's actually the next thing on my list is I would like to get regressed. I would like to take a lie detector test. I would like to track down Chano one day. My story's not done yet. I want to ask Chano the right questions. I was just a kid. All I wanted to ask Chano was, remember the UFO? Remember the UFO? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Yes or no? I wish I would have the frame of mind to ask Chano things like, what about that vortex in the clouds? Did you see that too? Because that's when it took us. That's when it took us. It was a clockwise swirl. And I was talking to another experiencer, and he asked me, do you know which direction it was going? And it's funny because no one asked me that before. And I go, you know what? It was going clockwise. And that's taking you in. And then if it was going counterclockwise, it's pushing you out, so to speak. That's what I gathered. But yeah, that vortex is the most confusing part of my experience, and that's what really had me questioning, was it just a sighting? Did they take me? It was like an emotional roller coaster of, am I good enough to be taken? Or how dare they? You know what I mean? I went through this emotion of just, how dare they do that to me without my consent, to what a privilege, what an honor. I don't get anything negative out of it. Yeah. I understand that there's definitely negative aspects. There's my lab, there's government, there's super soldier stuff. I know that there's other things that go on out there. Not in my experience, not in my case. Now I can go get regressively hypnotized tomorrow, and I might have a whole nother story for you. I don't know. I don't know it all. And I'm just trying to learn more and more about the phenomenon, you know?
Well, that's in my opinion, that's the right approach. Keep your options in your mind open.
Right.
And but I definitely would myself. I'm just picturing myself in your situation. I'd really want to know more. Yeah. And I think, perhaps. I mean, I know someone very well that does regression, and it's basically just relaxing. That's all it really is, and feeling like freer but it doesn't. Sometimes it doesn't work if you can't get in that. Right. But there's no tricks to it. It's not. She's very specific on not leading someone. That's a big issue. Right. With a lot of people will try to lead you into something, and it's something you have to do all on your own. Right. But anyway, no, it's a fascinating story, and I do appreciate you sharing it.
No, thanks for having me.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
So I'm with Brian Jackson. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And it was nice to meet you. And I understand, thank you for listening to my show.
Yes, a regular listener. As a matter of fact, you were doing for a while these roundtables.
Oh, yes.
And they were perfect when I do my every other day hike. So I'd start them right as the hike began and listen to them throughout. And it was just a nice way to pass the time and listen to some deeper intellect behind the scenes.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you. So you're here to talk about a very, very specific case or a very specific person. Can you go, well, first of all, what got you started in the interest in this whole thing?
The particular case or ufology in general?
No, the person.
Okay.
What's the last name?
Yeah, Burisch, Dan Burisch. He also goes by Dan Crane. In 2012, I had just been away from the UFO subject for a little bit while I was raising my family, and I was somewhat aware in the early 2000s that there was a story unfolding using the term J-Rod, and there was somebody claiming that there was this living entity. At that time, my interest in the subject remained, but I was doing a lot of research work on other things not related to Area 51 and S4. And also, I was focused on raising my family. But I had this job where in 2012 where I was using the computer at lunchtime because they had such a fast internet. And I thought, okay, I'm going to just eat my lunch here and go over some of these stories from the past. And I came across the name Bill Uhouse, who was first associated with this J-Rod story. And in looking into that, I discovered that my friend Bill Hamilton was connected to this story. And Bill is a friend of mine going way back from the early 90s, a highly reputable researcher. So when I found he was interested in the subject, I suddenly became interested. So it started from there, and the rabbit hole just began, and it's a big one for this story. It's extraordinarily controversial in most circles within the subject, and but I was fueled and excited by the research work of Bill Hamilton himself, and it was chronicled in his book Project Aquarius. But that's how it started, and I found the earliest video of Dan in 2002 being interviewed by Bill Hamilton, and I decided consciously I was going to start finding out what happened to this case, because I'm reading now about this in 2012, and I wanted to know what happened to this story. It seemed extraordinary, but everybody in ufology seemed to have written this guy off as a complete nut job and hoax. It bothered me because my friend Bill's name was associated with it. So when I went back and started to look into the details of it, I decided I'm going to just kind of start at the beginning and see where this unfolded, see how it ended. What was it about it? Was this a psyop or what? So that's the beginning of that rabbit hole.
And so, but did you have an interest in the UFO topic ahead of this?
Oh, of course. Yeah, going back to 1989 when the Bob Lazar story was unfolding. I was listening to a radio station out of Las Vegas and hearing him on the show fielding questions based on his purported work at the S4 facility. And it was really striking that he seemed to know what he was talking about and that this seemed to be an actual program. So I became really interested at that point.
I have now I don't know if you've heard me speak on my thoughts on Bob Lazar, but I've had this theory. It's a strange one, but with all of the reasoning and careful research that I've actually done over the years, including someone that works in records at MIT that I know that can do deep research, there's no way that his total record could be expunged, total all the way through to what she can research. So, but my theory is perhaps Bob has taken on someone's persona that he knows very closely and has gone ahead with all the claims because it just, in my opinion, it just does not line up that he would have done what he said he had done and had the clearance he had and all that in such a short time, and for all the other reasons and all the things that anybody can research and the issues that he had in his life and all that. It just doesn't add up. To me, I'm thinking that perhaps he took on this persona of someone that he knows really well because he did have some information that is really hard to explain. So I just wanted to get that out there.
Okay.
And then, but we can continue on. What did you find out when you were doing research on this Burleson?
Dan Burisch.
Burisch. I don't know why I can't remember his name. I apologize.
Yeah, no, that's understandable, and that's actually evidenced by the fact that people forgot his story. So this is what that rabbit hole was starting to reveal. But ironically, what I was finding is a tremendous amount of information and material on him. There was certificates of graduation, notable associations he belonged to. He was in 2 of the 4 journals of the Who's Who in the Sciences. 2 of those I own myself because I wanted to see which chronicles somebody's academic and associations achievements. There is up to 16 interviews of him and videos. I found those, many articles, many Q&A, radio shows, lots of material on him to digest. So I had a lot to work on. There was a lot that kept unfolding before me. So that is, to me, significantly different than the Bob Lazar case. But on that subject of Bob, one aspect being, some people find that his absence of records is a point of contention. That is specifically something that I pointed out in my presentation. That's actually a very normal component of people that work in the deep black projects. It's called being sheep-dipped. And it protects both the individual, the program, and any future foreign or domestic associate who wants to look into the background of people that are working on deep black programs. So it has a very specific purpose, and I even found a paper written by a gentleman specifically on this subject of sheep dipping. So the fact that you can't find records, not entirely the best reason to write somebody off. Now in Dan's case, Dan's mother was an archivist of Dan's educational records. So she kept copies of everything. So when I found Linda Moulton Howe was also interested in the subject with Dan and did specific research on his academic achievements, she unraveled all of his academic achievements. And also talking to his mother and father about Dan in the program. And they remember many times Dan being picked up in front of his house and being taken out to McCarran Air Force Base, or McCarran Airport, to go to Area 51. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of material to study.
Mm-hmm. And I understand what you're saying about the the lack of records, but when someone claims, this is how I view these type of things. Okay, when someone claims that let's just talk about education alone. Mm-hmm. They claim that they have the education they have, and they end up not having that education, and there's many ways to prove that. Then how can you believe the rest of the story? That's where I have a problem. And this is I'm only talking about Bob Lazar. And,
okay.
Yeah, and when I say this, for instance, when he was in a public forum and someone asked him, well, what's the square right outside of MIT? And anyone who's gone to lunch there know that it's Kendall Square right outside the door, right there. Mm-hmm. And if you go to MIT, of course you know that. And he had no idea. He said, I forget. And that's like, to me, that's like, well, that's enough. That's all the proof I need, plus the research person I know that's done the deep research. Yeah. And she just said there's absolutely no way that he could have ever gone here. And I trust her because she's I'm in close contact with her.
And I understand that association where if there is not a record of that particular academic institution that you can find a record of him working there, does that mean he could not have worked on the program at the facility? I know that's the association, but there's other aspects of his knowledge about the facility and about the specific program that in the time it was unraveling in 1990, 1989, we weren't aware of this term back engineering, which is now becoming clearer and clearer to everybody. There's some aspects of the story that I can go into deeper, although that's not necessarily the subject of today's discussion. And I know there's parallels because both of them worked there. Dan worked at the facility from 1991 to 2006. So he had an exceptional amount of time there. Mm-hmm. Where Bill, I think it was Bob was, I think, a matter of months.
Yeah, or weeks. Yeah, and so it kind of backfired if that's a situation about this dipping, whatever you called it.
Sheep dipping, yes.
Sheep dipping, because, he right away talked about it. So that was kind of a backfire if that was indeed the case. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, my thing is when someone is not telling the truth about one thing, then how can we believe the rest of what they say? But I want to know more about what you know about what Dan had to say.
Right. So what I wanted to do is find everything I could about the individual himself, and academic achievements was a big part of it. So from an early age, he had an interest in the sciences, a prodigy level interest in the sciences, specifically microscopy and the study of things through the microscope. So he was taken under the wing of the head of pathology at Long Beach Memorial Hospital and learned from there the art and science of histology and microbiology. He was the youngest member of the Los Angeles Microscopical Society, and his academic achievements were starting to be recognized by the U.S. Navy. So this is the claims. So there now exist many certificates and graduation degrees. The PhD is the biggest one that a lot of people were putting against him. But I'm satisfied with the claims of the who's who journals, which clearly stipulate his PhD that he got. And also his mother received a letter of congratulations from a gentleman, head of academic affairs at UNLV, praising Dan's new PhD. So there's things that point to that. But I also found other pieces of material that helped substantiate the fact that he seemed to have worked there. I was aware from Bill's book that there was a correspondence between two Air Force intelligence officers, one of which I know personally, that one wrote to the other talking about Dan's work at the S4 facility. So I reached out to this gentleman saying, I understand that you had a correspondence with this other person named Tom Mack when he worked at Area 51, which crosses over the time that Dan worked there, and he specifically was pointing out Dan's work there. Do you have that letter? He goes, well, a lot of our correspondences were by email. I said, yeah, that's not going to work. He says, I might have a handwritten letter. Within 45 minutes, he had scanned both sides of it and sent it back to me. It's a handwritten letter, and the letter talks about Dan's work with another assistant on his DNA work on the the R4800 program at PS2 complex, and that they were working on the alien, the quadaloid named Amos. And that letter, which had not been seen by anybody before, was another level of, okay, there's something, another data point that might substantiate this.
Jumping back to the PhD, where did he get that from?
State University, New York.
Now, can't you contact them and they would have all records of PhDs?
I would imagine the way the sheep dipping program works is they would expunge those. And I have since found out how that operation works, and it's almost always done by hacking a university records facility.
But
So
wouldn't that like ruin someone's future career not to be able to prove they have a PhD?
well,
I mean, I don't
it is in
understand.
the who's who. But okay, so I don't know how sheep dipping works if somebody is then taken out of a program and they try to get their records back. And it's only the PhD. All the other records in my presentation I show pictures of all the other certificates and degrees.
Well,
So-
we don't need to focus too long on that, but I mean,
No,
it
but
just occurred to me when you were talking about, looking for his PhD. That's
Yeah.
all. Okay, so this claims of, what was the name of the alien?
Well, the name of the one that is the bulk of the Dan Burisch story is a J-rod. A J-rod is a designation of a species.
I remember hearing that.
Yeah,
at
it's
some
not the
point.
name, it's
Yeah.
a designation. And the one that Dan worked with, supposedly his name is Kaela.
Okay.
Now, Bill Uhouse, who worked at Los Alamos National Labs, also supposedly worked with a J-rod. So Amos, I think, may have been an entity of which Dan was only working with tissue samples. A big part of Dan's work before he was rolled into the program at the S4 facility was to study tissues of unknown origin at the Groom Lake facility. There was a lab there, and that's where he was taken before he even knew anything about S4. And at that place, he was studying tissue samples in a lab where he didn't even see where they were coming from. They were coming in a conveyor under rectangular solids, and he was reading them and giving all of his impressions about what he was reading. I wonder if that intelligence officer was making reference to that alien's tissue, because the one at the S4 facility was, unless that was a nickname by somebody else, I don't know who Amos is.
So when he's receiving, is it kind of like a need-to-know situation? In other words, this comes up to him and then he has to, analyze it of what he knows of what it is, but he doesn't have any idea of what it is?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he and his assistant hit a wall at a point. They were recognizing, and this is far beyond my ability to articulate, but it's evident in a number of videos of his interviews. They were recognizing aspects of the cellular makeup of this being, and they were wondering if it's mammalian. They didn't quite understand, but there's aspects of it that didn't quite fit. And they eventually scratched their head and say, you know what, we are hitting a wall. I can't give an answer. This isn't making sense. He had no idea what he was looking at. And that's when actually what ended up happening was they separated from him for a couple of years. Didn't hear from him at all. He didn't hear from them. And then he was reapproached with the help of Dr. Edward Teller, who insisted that Dan start taking classes at State University of New York, and it would be subsidized by the U.S. Navy. They said, we want to bring you into a program. You're going to have to get a cover job, which he was as a state parole officer for the state of Nevada. You need this cover job. Don't worry, it's a way for you to earn money, but we're still going to bring some tissue samples to you on your job, and we're going to bring a microscope. And so at this point, he was now being groomed for a deep black program, of which he didn't know yet what it was.
So are these all, and first of all, when he's let go or whatever it is, that does he had, I would imagine he had a high clearance. Did he keep his clearance?
I don't know specifically how that works. Yes, he would have had to have some sort of clearance just to get onto the groom facility, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And are is this whole story, besides the letter that you received, is there any other corroboration of the type of things that he claims that he was doing?
Well, there is, besides the educational aspect, which I think is significant, and I have a lot of material on that, there's the work of other investigators. So I eventually hit a roadblock where I feel like I caught up with everything. There seemed to be a substantial amount of information. I'm now really wondering what happened with this case. So I started to reach out to Linda Howe, Paula Harris, Mark McCandlish, Michael Schratt, and a number of others, saying, listen, I know you guys were involved in this. And many of them I met in person. What happened to this story? And they didn't seem to have an answer. They said, I don't know, I totally believed him. When I met with Linda Howe, she was energized by the fact that I was investigating this and looking into it. She goes, yeah, I don't know. I don't know why it went dark. There was an article written that's tried to diminish his reputation, but I feel like that article that was written in UFO magazine was more a commentary rather than investigation that revealed details that were substantial. So that might have been what everybody locked into. An issue of UFO magazine that was from 2004, and by the way, Dan's story was still maturing at that point. It went all the way to 2008, yet this 2004 article seemed to, I think, satisfy a lot of people that that his case wasn't worth looking into.
Now, is this when you say the word, there was a lot of controversy, is this like the beginning of the controversy of his story? That article?
Well, the claims were already fantastic, admittedly so.
Yes.
Let's break it down. He talked about a program he worked on, which required him to work with a living entity. A J-rod, that's a designation from a being that is from Gliese 876c, that came here, crashed in Kingman in '53, and one of the entities which was alive was taken to Los Alamos, one was taken to Area 51S4. Within this program, Dan worked with the entity, had a psychic connection with it. His role as it relates to the biology of this entity was to understand the biological makeup of the being itself. Part of that was having to work with the alien and taking skin aspirations from the entity's arm, of which a total of 200 over the years was taken, and studying the biology of this entity. Not only studying the biology of the entity, but to try to back engineer why the physiology of this being was breaking down. What Dan found out was that on a very biological level, this was a future human being in every sense. And even psychically, the entity claimed he was a future human being from 52,000 years in the future. These claims are clearly fantastic. And a lot of people, especially back in the year 2000 or 2002 when this first came out, I think the air of controversy around the subject, this just fed it.
Yeah.
But I feel like now there's actually a lot that's been maturing over the years. We're now here in the year 2025, and we've gotten testimony from whistleblowers, not the least of which is even David Grush, who, when interviewed by News Nation by Ross Coulthart twice, when asked, do we have agreements, he didn't respond in the negative. And that's part of Dan's claims as well, is that the program he was involved in also gave him access to the history of our knowledge about the beings we've been interacting with, and that there's been agreements drawn up and those are revisited every 9 years. So again, back then, this is absolute crazy talk. How does he verify that? So there's plenty of controversy there.
Yeah. So supposedly what happened to the being?
Well, there was a break from Dan's work on the program. And eventually, and this is another part of the fantastic story that nobody has an ability to prove, there was Stargates that we had been working with for many, many years. And there was one that was established in Egypt, and there was a program that required this entity, the J-Rod, to be there. And Dan was called in because the J-Rod in him had a level of trust that the J-Rod required that Dan be there. And somehow in the unfolding of this particular operation, a Stargate was opened, and Dan used this pod that the entity was in and pushed it through because the entity wanted to go home. So
E.T. went home.
E.T. went home.
Wow.
So some aspects of this spin out into directions I clearly know I have no way to verify.
Yeah.
What I wanted to do is just break down the basics. Let's look at education, who he is, where he went to school, who he is shepherded through this program with. And I've since found in private conversation with a lot of people, including some here this weekend, that knew some of these people firsthand that shepherded Dan. So I think what my point is not to prove Dan's case is completely true, but this is an example of how ufology, I think, overlooked cases that they relied on an article that was written to lean into instead of looking at the facts of the case.
Now, did he ever talk about any video recording of any of the interaction or any of that?
Yeah, I mean, the interaction inside the clean sphere at the S4 facility, all of it, I'm sure, was all video recorded. And that dovetails possibly into Jon Stewart's work on the alien documentary he put together, because apparently that supposed living entity that was videotaped, that got leaked in the 90s, was also from that facility.
Now, I thought that was kind of proven to be a hoax.
I recommend that you watch that documentary. I give kudos to John. He really pounded the pavement and looked into that. And I think he would also sit here and go, look, I'm not going to hit you over the head and tell you this is absolutely true. But this isn't what everybody claimed it was. This is certainly not a doll. You know, he did some really good work, and some of the equipment that's seen in the video in the background, he specifically looked into too, and he went to institutions that make medical equipment and said, "Do you know what this is?" And I said, anyhow, I think a takeaway that I'd like is that people must realize they can't just rely on the voices of a few that character assassinate, which is a commonplace. That is commonplace in this. It's a very emotional subject. So.
Well, it's like Stanton Friedman used to say, if you can't attack the evidence, you attack I forget exactly what his phrase was, but in other words, That's kind of what he saw in the UFO community with the skeptics. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be skeptical about in these claims, and it's really, you know, I mean, if there was some way to prove, you know, that this is true, and then we'll, you know, who knows? I would probably imagine that we will never know if any of these claims, because when it's in something like, you know, a compartmentalized situation like that, and the need to know and all that, you know, I don't think we'll ever really know, or will we?
I don't know, but there's a big part of this we haven't talked about.
Okay.
So in my investigation, and part of, I lean into a lot of investigative formulas that have to do with patterns. If I see things that are repeated and repeated as part of a case, I'm going to look into them. And there was a term that was used often in the interviews of Dan, and that is the golden thread. So I looked into it and found this was an online forum. And I found this online forum, and it was displayed as a very kind of archaic early 1990s format. It's almost like a forum where people talk about various subjects and people have open discussion about those things. When I logged in and I saw what was being talked about, it made no sense to me. It looked like codified military operational dialogue. And in my presentation, I have many snippets of the things that were talked about. And Dan and his associate Marcy seemed to be leading all of this operation. And they were using the term majestic, and that Dan was MJ1. And so I sat back and just for weeks, I was looking at this stuff, and it was unfolding every day, many times a day. There was operations, there's delegating people to do this and this, and we've got to get Dan out to this place in Europe to do this and talk with this person. And I had an opportunity to dialogue with these people where there was something I could maybe offer some question or insight on, because there was references to Dan and his past work on the program. And I eventually, I think, gained a level of trust that they knew I was intelligent enough to have serious discourse about what was going on. I'm brushing over a lot and trying to synthesize this down. And I think Dan, who sometimes would answer my questions, got a level of comfort for who I was. Now, this type of forum, when you become a member, you have access to some of the back-end analytics that shows how many people are logging in every day. And it seems like most everybody that was logging in every day were these people that were part of this operation. Very few of what I would consider the outside public were even contributing to conversation and part of this forum. Well, eventually a post went out saying Dan is going to be doing an operation outside of Las Vegas, and he would like to invite members of the public on this forum to join him. It's going to be a one-day thing. There's a little bit of hiking involved, and I was an avid hiker. And we're going to just do this, and then we're all going to have a great time, and there's lunch involved, and it's going to be fun. And I reached out and said, I'd like to be a part of this. And eventually I got a private message from one of Dan's people saying, Dan has you in mind for something different. He would like to set up a phone call with you. And a phone number will be given. So I was given a phone number eventually and a date and a time to contact Dan, which led to an hour-and-a-half phone call in 2018. And it's interesting, the phone number they gave me was similar to the phone numbers that were left on the forum many other times for the public who wants to reach out to Dan or Marcy. And they were all off by the last digit. The last digit was always different. Strange. In this phone call I had with Dan, where I actually talked to him, there was a lot of things we talked about in ufology and about what he's doing now with Majestic. And I was just open and honestly acknowledging he must be in this program. But he was expressing a number of times, I feel comfortable talking to you. He said that 3 times. He says, okay, here's the deal. I'm working on my accessory project called Project Lotus, which, if you're familiar with the entirety of the Dan story, this is something he was doing off the side. He was working on a project that had to do with the study of and by the way, another point of a serious data point, he was invited to speak at Caltech in 2008 by one of the professors of mathematics. He spoke at Beckman Auditorium. This is the place where Einstein spoke. And Dan spoke there, and that's even still available online on YouTube. You can watch the entire talk he gave, and it's about this Project Lotus. I was always aware of this Project Lotus, and when he told me on this phone call, I need somebody who's not in the sciences, which is me, I'm not in the sciences. I would like somebody in the sciences to look at some of the data I'm finding to make sure it makes sense to them, because I'm going to be entering this into the Library of Congress, and I want to have it peer reviewed. And I want to make sure everybody can understand this because it's that significant. And I said, that's great. I'll need to, whatever you send me, I'm going to need some sort of context because I'm not in the sciences. You tell me what I'm looking at or what I should be looking for, and I'll give you my opinion. And so we both set up a Proton mail account, and he started sending me material. He would send me photographs, he would send me charts. He even sent me a video where my name was on the title to start reviewing and provide feedback. None of it came with any sort of setup. There was no context given, nothing. And it then eventually led to some of his handlers, I call them, reaching out to me and saying, we would like to know what your bottom line is with Dan. And I said, why? They said, well, we looked into your social media and we have identified some names of people that you're following that we do not agree with. And they gave me the names.
Was my name on there?
I don't remember. And I said, by the way, just because somebody's following somebody doesn't mean they associate with them in social media. Anyway, they didn't like that answer. So they cut me off. They blocked my IP address.
Wow.
And cut off all communications with Dan.
Wow. Boy, one little false step, huh?
I feel like that's another thing. I got a little close to him there. And by the way, he was a very personable, super nice person to me.
And when you say was, is he passed?
No, he's not
still
passed.
alive?
He's living in Canada right now.
Oh.
And he's still surrounded by handlers, got security personnel, and even a doctor.
Wow. Wow, he sounds like a very interesting person.
No kidding. This entire thing was. I've been doing this for 13 years.
Wow. Wow.
So I finally reached the point. I thought some of his people might reach back out to me, and they haven't. So I'm like, okay, I'm finally just going to talk about this. I think ufology needs to know that some of these things happen. There are people on programs that work, and they're a part of a subterfuge, and they're part of a protocol that is so deep. And I think the only reason that Dan was allowed to speak about this openly was because it was part of an agreement with the entities, part of the treaties. Yeah, so
wow.
I think that was the reason. And I think Majestic, reluctantly, he didn't want to be a part of this, asked him to be the one to come forward. And he harbored a great resentment against Majestic afterwards. He hated the idea that he was to be the front man. So.
Wow. All fascinating. Well, thank you so much. It's been very interesting.
Thank you, Martin.
Especially since, you know, when you started talking, when you mentioned J-Rod, oh yeah, I heard of that. And when you also, there was another situation that you spoke about, I recognize that I have read something about over the years.
Okay.
But when, you know, I had my UFO sighting in 2007, and this was more out there in 2008, so I wasn't really into the topic and didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
As far as, so I'm a newbie as far as that goes, you know. But anyway, thanks so much.
Thank you. Great time. Thanks.